Have you ever wondered, will everyone want a refrigerator or TV or washing machine as the economy or the economic growth rises in a household? It's a very fascinating case for people who are in transition in the built environment, especially for people who have been living in poverty, like in the slums I have a case study of Mumbai. And when they're moved from the slums to slum rehabilitation housing, which are the formal housing, the characteristics quite changes. And my name is Ramit Debnath, and I am a PhD student at Behavior and Building Performance Group at the Department of Architecture. And I'll be talking about energy sustainability and the ways or the invisible drivers in the slum rehabilitation housing that forces the people to use more energy or whatever less energy we'll see throughout this presentation. So this is a very broad outline of the presentation, and first I'll give a very broad overview of the slums and what are the mitigation strategies that are available today, and then I'll go more deeper into my case study area that's in Mumbai in India, and then I'll talk about what are our key findings from that study, and then I'll go more deeper into the modeling approach that we did for this study of the drivers of energy use in the slum rehabilitation. So this is the global distribution of urban slums. We can see that more number of urban slums are present in the global south, and almost for countries like China and India, it's almost 1/4 of the total urban population are living in slums. So it's a very big problem, or it's a very current challenge that the urban planners are facing, or even the countries in the global south are facing it. And so broad definition of slums as per the United Nations Habitat Program is a slum is a space where many people are living under one roof and they lack at least or all of these 5 characteristics. So the first is they lack access to improved water for drinking or for general use. They lack improved sanitation facilities, and they don't have a durable structure, or here it's written as structural quality is very low because these are all temporary makeshift households. And they don't have a security of tenure. That means it's temporary, and they are basically in illegal lands in a city. So that's a huge problem of the slums that makes it an informal urban settlement. And I mean, the slum population is huge in the global south, and as the cities are urbanizing, this population keeps on, rising with the pace. So these are some of the examples of slums from Mumbai, Rio, and Medellin in Colombia. And we can see that in these 3 pictures, it's very characteristic that these houses are not permanent houses. They are made of temporary, as we can see from the leftmost figure, and they are overcrowded, and they don't have, there is no pattern of planning. It's just wherever people could find, they just made a house basically to just settle in the urban areas. So the mitigation strategy for countering slums are the current policies are slum rehabilitation programs or slum rehabilitation, it's called housing. So we'll see what is slum rehabilitation housing and how it's done. And so in the current discourse, slum rehabilitation is considered as a very robust policy approach to solve urban slumming. And one of the reasons is it provides a permanent address to the residents of slums who are, living in temporary structures. And it's a rise up the social ladder for the people, because at first they were living in temporary structures, and now they are moved to a state-owned or formal housing system. So it's like fulfilling one of their aspiration of having a permanent house. So it's a rise up the social ladder. And the model is financially viable for government because they don't have to pay anything. It's the developer who develops this slum rehabilitation housing, and they get their land to develop premium apartments to sell in the market. So that's a whole model of slum rehabilitation, that the developer gets to pick up a huge chunk of land and make premium apartments and make money out of it. So while these are considered as like the pro slum rehabilitation measures or policies, but it has a very serious effect, because once developer get that land, so they don't care about the quality of the housing they are building for the people living in slums. So basically they are making horizontal, or from horizontal slums they are converting it into vertical structure, which again represent a slum like built environment, because they don't care what's the quality in it, because they are mostly interested in the market part of that project, which can give them a lot of money. So now coming back to Mumbai. So Mumbai has one of the largest slums in the world, and 42% of Mumbai's population lives in slum. And these 5 stages is a broad example of what's the slum rehabilitation process is. So the first stage is where a cooperative is formed between the developers and the dwellers. So it needs like at least 72% of the slum dwellers should agree for that project. So that's considered as one of a very successful cooperative approach. Then it comes to the design phase, where it's most like work with compliance and certification of the housing and housing design, and how it should be built with respect to their socio-cultural aspects. And then the stage 3 is basically making a makeshift housing for them, because the slum rehabilitation housing is being made on the slum land. And once the slum rehabilitation buildings are completed in stage 4, the occupants are moved to the slum rehabilitation housing, and then there is a huge chunk of land which is just for the developers to make. So they make premium apartments in there and they sell it for huge prices. So just as an example, the real estate market of Mumbai is as pricey as that of London or of New York. So it's a huge profit margin for the developers. And this process is, that's why it's very acceptable to developers to just dive into the slum rehabilitation process, because it's a huge profit making body. Now the problem with this is that as the houses are not made as it should be made for normal people, and they just made it as a act of charity, because to get the land, so it causes a rebound phenomena. So the rebound phenomena means the occupants who have been moved to the slum rehabilitation housing, they abandon those houses and they move back to the horizontal slums, either to the same part of the city or to a different part of the city. So that's often referred to as recycling of poverty, because people who have been like living in poverty were moved to a better accommodation, but they are again living that and moving back to some other parts of the city, and it just expands the slums. So this process is called rebound effect of the slum rehabilitation housing policy. So we can see from these 3 images, the first on the right side is abandoned slum rehabilitation housing. You can see how the conditions are. They are stacked very close to one another, like how shoe boxes are stacked in. And you can see from this image that the distance is really low, and it's not as per how urban planners or architects recommend. So it usually turns up to be a garbage dump, and people just throw dump between the houses. And these towers are almost like 15 to 20 story tall. So you can see also from the middle image is that these houses, they don't represent the like normal house, because they are so dense and so many people are fit into this slum rehabilitation housing. They almost represent a vertical slum. So that's the biggest problem with the current slum rehabilitation method, that it causes a huge rebound phenomena with the occupants, and they leave these houses abandoning, like in the first image, or they just keep it. They make it extremely unhygienic and unsafe for the occupants to live in these tall structures. So that's the problem, that if the same thing continues over a long period, then the slums, the horizontal slum will slowly transform into vertical structures like this. It's a animated image of not a very distant future, where if the same structure of policies emerge or it continues, then the whole built environment can be like this, which is extremely bad for occupants' health and well-being and everything associated with it. So we investigated this, and we thought of asking what causes discomfort and distress among the occupants that have been moved to slum rehabilitation housing, and we take the case study of Mumbai. So this was a part of my MPhil in engineering, and we did a very small pilot survey of 30 households, and we asked them, we asked them questions from a host range of subjects, right from the physical, that is the thermal comfort or indoor air quality, which is measurable, to a more subjective terms like well-being. And so that's why it's both discomfort and distress, and we investigate what are the causes, and it's through a participatory surveys. So this is the finding, and we found that there are two major causes of discomfort and distress. The first is the economic distress. So it's established that these occupants live in poverty. So income is a distress that's always there. But what is surprising is that once these occupants are moved from the slums to slum rehabilitation housing, they tend to buy more household appliances. And this, when they buy more appliances, their household electricity bill increases. So there is an impact on electricity use, residential electricity use, and they do not, apprehend that it will happen. So what are the causes of why they are so much drawn into purchasing more appliances, and whether it can be like that they can't afford to buy it in the first place, so they take loans from their families or neighbors or from informal money lenders, which is again a huge distress to them because they can't repay it in the specified time. So that's a part of economic distress, and more physical distresses are in terms of discomfort, like related to architecture. That is, they have extremely poor indoor air quality because there are no air exchange pathway in the houses, and the primary mean of cooling is through fans and natural ventilation, and even as there are no cross ventilation pathways, so it's a big discomfort to them. Also, they say a very critical socio-cultural characteristic was they lack social spaces, which is very important to them as a society. Because for the people living in slums, they act as a very communal group. And when they're moved to this vertical structure, it disintegrated. So it became a huge problem to them because they can't meet and do their household activities together. And this was not understood by the developers because they just were interested in developing a tall structure to rehabilitate them. So this was one of the space-based distress, which was quite critical to their well-being or discomfort and distress in that housing. So now we tried to go more deeper into the problem of higher appliance ownership and why it's happening. And we asked questions like, is it because their built environment is in transition? That means from a horizontal form, they are moved into a vertical structure. Is that has to do something with higher appliance ownership? Or whether there is a change in their household routines or daily routines, which may contribute to higher appliance ownership? Or it's just they are fulfilling aspirations because they feel that they have moved up the social ladder as they have moved from slums to permanent housing structure. So can that be a problem? Or it's because these houses are closer to the market, so they have more access to appliances, especially different brands and stuff like that. So we asked this in three broad themes. One is household practice, which was based on social practice theory. And then built environment, which was the questions were from our previous understanding of indoor air quality and thermal comfort. And then appliance characteristics, which was pure market-based, whether it was brand or quality or product cost or stuff like that. So this is our hypothetical model where we investigate whether the number of appliances purchased after moving to the slum rehabilitation housing has anything to do with these three elements. And because it's not established in the current literature, whether there is a pathway or like a direct pathway or indirect pathway related to it. So we did a survey of 1,224 households, and we asked questions pertaining to whether who makes decision in the household, whether it's the male or the female, whether there is a change in your mandatory activities like cooking, washing, and cleaning, and change related to hours spent on these activities. So we asked them what's the difference between when you were in the slums and when you moved to the slum rehabilitation housing, and also whether you have increased watching TVs or using information and communication devices like radios or computers or smartphones, and if they can afford a laptop or computer. And then we also asked whether do you feel that there is an increase in indoor activities, that because in slums, as it was a very communal system, they used to spend most of their time outdoors with the community members, but now when you are moved to the slum rehabilitation housing, has those activities have moved indoors, and whether it has to do anything with increasing the energy intensity. So these were the part of household practices, and built environment was very clear from our previous findings that it was how do you find your indoor air quality, or do you have problem with the hygiene with your surroundings and in the buildings, and thermal comfort and stuff. And this appliance characteristics was pretty much from the market textbook, that whether do you find size, brand, product cost, quality, and this stuff more important in your appliance purchase decision. So some of the results are, this is a very interesting graph that shows what are the mostly bought household appliances. So we can see fans and TVs and refrigerators are the mostly purchased household appliances, and with the exception of iron, that is ironing your clothes and stuff like that. And also this washing machine, I'll show in the next slide that it's a very important commodity for them, because most of the washing machines and refrigerators are bought after moving to the slum rehabilitation housing, because most of them had fans and TVs earlier as well. And also a very energy intensive part, but it's a very small portion, are the ACs. But it's really fascinating to see that these households who are in poverty can afford ACs and can install them, because they are huge energy guzzlers, in terms of bills. And the next plot, it shows that what was different in terms of appliance ownership, like before they were living in slums and after they were moved to the slum rehabilitation housing. So we can see that the fans were already there, so it's not much. Although it's 35% of the people, they purchased newer fans, or like they replaced their fans. But in terms of ACs, as I mentioned, although it's just a very small portion, but 100% of the ACs were bought after they moved to the slum rehabilitation housing. Same is with washing machine, which is like 2/3 of the whole population, survey population. And then there is microwaves and even refrigerators. Also, surprisingly, laptops and computers were also quite popular, and people are really keen on buying these devices, because I'll show it in the next slides, because their activities are slowly shifting indoors, and that they need a new avenues to spend more time, rather than which was the opposite structure in slum rehabilitation, slums. And yeah, TV were also like almost half, but it's mostly due to they replaced the models of the TV. Earlier they used to have a cheaper ones, but now they have expensive LED models and stuff like that. So also we observed that there were many practice-based changes, like as I mentioned, that many of the activities that moved indoors. So activities like cooking and washing, which was very communal in the slums, it's now shifted indoors, and it was primarily and only due to lack of common spaces in the vertical structures. Also, there is a significant reduction of people participating in subsistence activities. So very characteristics of this low-income housing is that they have subsistence activities which are maybe informal, but they do it in community to just support their livelihood. So these are not recognized formally by the government, but they just do it to supplement their whatever income they have. So they completely stopped because they need, again, social space, which was not there. So that's a huge economic distress to them at the current slum rehabilitation state. And as the activities moved indoors, so we also found that they have increased their time in watching televisions in the slum rehabilitation housing or the vertical structures. And so now we have some idea about what's happening there, and it can be change of household practice or built environment or appliance characteristics. And now we try to establish this invisible link, and it's true. We did a structural equation modeling. I'll not go into details of it, but I mean we wanted to see what's happening inside the slums when people are moved from slum to slum rehabilitation housing. So it's interesting to see that the built environment has a positive and significant influence on appliance characteristic. That means when people are moved to this vertical structure, they feel that they have had a permanent place, so they now need better quality of appliances. So that's why it becomes important for them to have appliances which have better brands, but they also keep in mind of product cost and quality and all of those aspects. Also, it's surprising that there is no significance of the size of the appliance, because these houses are very small, so it's usually assumed that these people, if they buy new appliance, they will consider size as a factor. But for them, owning a bigger TV is much of an advantage socially than having a smaller TV to fit their household. So, I mean, this is a direct link between how they feel when they get to a permanent structure, like the vertical houses in slum rehabilitation, and its influence on appliance characteristics mostly. And then these appliance characteristics, as they are purchasing more appliances, it has another significant influence on the change of household practices. As I mentioned, that most of these household practices moved indoors, so we can see that it has a very huge influence, or a significant influence, on cooking activity, because earlier it used to be a communal effort of cooking. Like some of the neighbors would cut the vegetables, and some will wash it, and some will cook it for a family of 3 or 4 and stuff like that. Now it's very individualistic, because the houses are as such, it's very individual. And similarly, it has, I mean, you can see that hours spent in subsistence activity has also a positive influence in change. As I mentioned, that they now don't have space to do that, so they can't gather socially and work for additional income. And it has a significant influence on increase in activities which were performed indoors. So they tend to spend more time indoors because they don't know their neighbor, and the community structure is broken in that shifting from slums to slum rehabilitation. And this household practice is actually affecting the number of appliances purchased on shifting. So, I mean, this is an invisible driver that's not quite seen, because, I mean, who would understand that change of practice from outdoor to indoor can actually influence higher appliance ownership. But surprisingly, the built environment has a negative impact. So that means if the built environment of the slum rehabilitation housing, the quality decreases, the people will have more tendency to buy appliances, because they want to counter it in a way. So, and how do they counter it? It's through watching more TV or engaging in more ICT devices like computers or smartphones. So we can see that it has a negative relationship, and it's in dotted lines, that even if the perception of indoor air quality, if they find that the indoor air quality has decreased in their current houses, which is the slum rehabilitation housing in vertical structure, so they will tend to purchase more appliances just to counter it, or maybe forget that they live in a shitty house or something like that. So based on this, we have now a very concrete idea of what can be the drivers of higher appliance ownership, and it's maybe appliance characteristic, it has a strong effect, and change of household practice also has a strong effect. So these two components are very clear in what causes them to purchase higher appliances. And on the other hand, the built environment, which is a very controllable variable, because if the developers make their houses in a much better way, so that means you can prevent people from buying higher appliances, or maybe you can make their life easier through a different pathway, because they don't feel overburdened with the quality of their houses in the current place. And so some of the critical inferences that we can mention are this change of practice from moving the people from slums to slum rehabilitation is actually contributing to increase in energy intensivity. And by energy, I clearly mean the residential electricity uses, which is again reflecting in their higher electricity bills, which they can't pay, and they feel like it's a huge economic burden to them. by establishing the fact that they are already in poverty, even a 10% increase in household bill is a huge increase for them, and it's usually more than 10%, is around 30% of electricity bill increase. And they purchase washing machines and more like advanced models of TVs and refrigerator, and they are purchasing it to counter that difference in their change of practices and change in their built environment. And as I mentioned several times, that lack of social spaces is also like one of the key design factor that can be mitigated very easily in the coming building stock of the slum rehabilitation housing. So based on this, now it was a very micro level study of a slum rehabilitation housing in Mumbai, but what can be the broader inferences in terms of policy? So lack of social spaces, we know that it causes a discomfort in those housing, and it causes change in practice. So it's basically ineffective design that's contributing to their burden, or here in this case it's more of an energy burden. So the policies should focus in the built environment of this low income housing, which is not there in the literature because no one thought of it in that manner. That's a way forward for my study as well, that how can we integrate energy policy with this low income built environment policy to deliver sustainability in these households. It's very clear that the ineffective design is a very important component of their whole array of discomfort and distress, and it's very difficult to tell them not to buy appliances, because that's how economic growth occurs, that you move up the social ladder and you tend to have aspirations to buy more appliances. But can this problem be solved using a better design of this slum rehabilitation household? And that can be done through more housing and urban policy angle. And so that's the whole idea, that substandard design of these houses is posing an energy burden on these people. So substandard design is already associated with health hazards of people, that if you don't have enough ventilation, then it's a health hazard in terms of respiration, or a wide array of well-being problems. And now we found that it's also associated with energy burden. So the design can be a very important variable to improving the quality of life of these people living in low income. And also it's very important to discuss that refrigerators and washing machines in low income, they are designed to reduce female burden, or female hardship in those low income households, because they had to do a lot of their work by themselves, and they are also considered as welfare appliances. So is there any way that the builders can have a policy of including these appliances right from the beginning of this slum rehabilitation housing, so that they don't have to buy these appliances again, and that can relieve a bit from their economic burden? And this is usually very common practice in West, where you already get fully furnished houses, at least with the basic appliances that you need. So it's not a very difficult policy approach to have a good energy policy by including these welfare appliances for people living in low income. So for me, the next step would be to establish a link between whether this increase in appliance purchase affects the well-being of the occupants, and I'll be going next month to survey that and to get some numbers on it, that whether energy and well-being is related or closely related in this slum rehabilitation housing. And then I plan to have a broad discussion in terms of energy justice for the people. So because it's very evident that the government of India, or any government in the global south, will require more energy to move these people up from the poverty. But can this be done without affecting their quality of life in a much bad way, or can there be a policy approach so that their quality of life is actually improved as they move up the energy ladder in near future, in fact? And so that's the end of my talk, and these are some of the acknowledgements of our research team. And yeah, thank you for listening.